He just wanted to capture a beautiful lighthouse at dawn. But the drone's camera recorded something that shook the entire village. The secret they were trying to hide turned out to be far more terrifying than anyone could have imagined. Subscribe to the channel and write in the comments which city you are watching from. The coast always carried with it a kind of silence that seemed deeper than any other place. Even when the waves crashed with force against the jagged rocks and the gulls wheeled above with their endless cries, the air itself felt solemn, weighted with something that belonged neither to sea nor sky, but to both at once. That morning, the horizon of Maine was a pale stretch of gray, thickened with fog that pressed close against the cliffs and swallowed the line between ocean and heavens. The scent of salt was sharp, mixed with iodine and damp earth, the smell of a place that had endured centuries of storms without surrendering. The wind came cold from the north, rattling the dry grass along the cliffs and spreading mist like a veil over the distant water. Eric Hansen had lived with this silence for years. He had once known a life where radios barked commands, where alarms cut through sleep, where the sea was a place of constant threat as much as beauty. Now he lived in a wooden house that looked out over the Atlantic, small and weather-beaten, a place where he could breathe without the weight of a uniform on his shoulders. Each morning began the same. He woke before the sun fully touched the horizon, made a pot of coffee strong enough to jolt him from the fog of sleep, and ate something plain and reliable. His hand still moved with the precision of an officer, each motion economical, each tool placed back in its exact place. Habits like that never left a man, no matter how long he had been retired. Retirement had been forced rather than chosen. Years back, during a storm patrol, he had been thrown from a cutter's deck when a wave struck harder than expected. He had survived with a shattered leg, pinned steel against flesh until the crew pulled him back, but he had never truly recovered his strength. The doctors told him he was lucky to walk again, and perhaps he was, but the sea never forgave weakness. Service demanded more than he could give, and so he had left. He found himself living in a place that seemed to belong more to memory than to the present. The ocean never disappeared, though. It called in subtle ways, in the cry of gulls, in the crash of breakers, in the faint glow of lighthouses he once trusted like companions on endless nights. The lighthouses had always held his fascination. To some, they were only structures, obsolete in the age of satellites and GPS, but to him, they were guardians. He had stood watch countless nights, the cold wind gnawing through his coat, and seen those beacons carve through fog and storm. Their light had been the difference between a ship finding harbor and a ship shattering on hidden rocks. He respected them not as relics, but as symbols of vigilance. Of all the lights on that coast, one in particular carried weight for him: the Forest Cape Lighthouse. His father had been a fisherman, and Eric grew up hearing stories of how that light had guided the old man home through storms when compasses faltered and the stars were hidden. The lighthouse had been decommissioned years ago, left to rust and salt and the gnawing wind. Tourists were warned away. The stairs inside were corroded, the lantern room cracked. Yet it still stood, proud and gray, a monument of stone and steel, watching over the sea that no longer needed it. It was this place that pulled Eric from his bed that morning. He had taken up a new habit after leaving the service flying his drone. To some, it was a hobby, a toy meant for leisure, but for him it became a way of keeping discipline alive. The drone demanded attention, demanded care and patience, demanded the same sort of ritual he once applied to weapons and navigation equipment. He enjoyed the way it could rise above the world, giving him an angle no human eye could reach. More than once, he had filmed the long line of coast in golden light, capturing the slow pulse of waves and the forgotten beauty of places people rarely stop to see. Today, he told himself, he would capture the Forest Cape Lighthouse at dawn, framed in fog and surf. It would be another addition to his growing archive, something to show his niece when she visited, perhaps something worth posting to the quiet online channel he had created. Before leaving the house, he checked the drone as carefully as he had checked a rifle years before. He unfolded its arms, polished the lens of the camera, confirmed the batteries were charged, and the spare set packed neatly in its case. Each cord was coiled with precision, each tool stored exactly as it should be. There was something calming about that ritual, as though order in these small things could hold chaos at bay. By the time he stepped outside, the air was biting cold, and his breath came out in white puffs. The truck started with a groan, and he guided it down the winding road through forest and over gravel paths until he reached the overlook that faced the sea. From there, the lighthouse appeared through the fog like a sentinel. It rose from the cliff, its stone face streaked with salt, its lantern glass clouded and fractured. The cliffs below were dark with seaweed and slick from spray, waves smashing themselves into foam as though testing the old tower's endurance. The place looked deserted, as it had for years. Yet in Eric, it stirred a deep and complicated feeling. He remembered the first time he had sailed past it as a boy, sitting beside his father on a fishing boat, the man pointing to the flashing light and saying, "That is what keeps men alive." He remembered, too, the nights on patrol when the lighthouse shone in the distance, like a reminder that land was near. Now, it was only a skeleton of what it had once been, but still it held power. He parked the truck on gravel that crunched beneath the tires, then stepped out and breathed in the damp salt air. For a long moment, he simply stood with his arms folded, eyes fixed on the lighthouse. The roar of the sea below seemed constant, as though time itself had no meaning here. He set down the case, opened it, and began the quiet ritual of assembling his drone. His hands moved with practiced ease, every part in its place, every step carried out as though it were a sacred act. Finally, the drone lifted from the ground, its propellers humming steadily. It rose into the mist, carrying his gaze upward with it, until the screen in his hands filled with the image of the sea and the tower. The footage was breathtaking. The ocean spread out in a restless gray sheet, the cliffs jutted like teeth, and the lighthouse loomed solitary against the fog. Sunlight began to creep across the horizon, its golden beams piercing through the mist and scattering patterns across the waves. To most, it might have seemed only a ruin, but to Eric, it was magnificent, an old soldier still standing. He guided the drone closer, circling slowly to capture the worn stone, the broken windows, the weeds growing along the stairwell. Every detail spoke of abandonment, yet also of endurance. Then something else appeared. At the base of the cliff, nestled against dark rocks where the surf struck hardest, a small motorboat sat in the shadows. It was not the kind of vessel one expected near an abandoned lighthouse. The paint was peeling, but the hull was intact, and the motor gleamed faintly in the new light. No fisherman would have left a boat there, exposed to the tides. Eric frowned, leaning closer to the screen. He thought of the warnings posted in town, the signs that forbade entry to the old tower. No one had any reason to land there, not with currents so treacherous. And yet the boat remained, as though someone had come ashore recently. He adjusted the controls, bringing the drone lower. Near the boat, something bulky rested under a canvas tarp, the edges held down with rope. The shape was too precise to be driftwood or debris. He could not see markings, not from this angle, but the presence of covered cargo was strange enough to set his instincts stirring. His years in uniform had taught him to distrust what did not belong, what broke the order of a place. The sight of the boat, the hidden cargo, and the open path to the lighthouse pressed on his mind. He hovered the drone a moment longer, the hum steady, his breath tightening in the cold air. Something was wrong here, though he could not yet name it. The lighthouse stood silent in the fog, a ruin meant only for memories, but now it seemed to carry a weight beyond nostalgia. For the first time in years, Eric felt the familiar knot of tension in his chest, the sense that what he saw might be the beginning of something far more dangerous than he had planned for that morning. And yet, he kept filming, the drone circling slowly, the ocean roaring below, the boat waiting in silence at the foot of the tower. The drone hovered obediently above the restless sea, its camera panning slowly over the broken face of the lighthouse. On the small screen in Eric's hands, the details sharpened as the fog began to thin. What he had taken as the ordinary ruin of an abandoned structure soon revealed signs of intrusion. The main door, once held shut by a rusted chain that had long ago become fused to the iron ring, stood ajar. The chain itself was gone, or rather, it lay discarded at the base of the door like a snapped bone. He leaned closer to the monitor, narrowing his eyes, as though that could bring the scene closer still. The door's angle was unmistakable. Someone had been inside, and recently. The unease that had stirred within him at the sight of the boat now deepened into certainty. This was not the casual trespass of thrill-seeking teenagers, nor the careless vandalism of tourists who ignored warning signs. There was purpose here. Eric steadied his breathing, his fingers precise on the controls as he guided the drone lower. The machine obeyed with a hum, skimming the air just above the jagged rocks that jutted like broken teeth from the surf. The screen shifted, revealing the covered objects near the boat more clearly. The canvas tarp had been caught by the wind, pulled back just enough to expose the faint outline of a painted symbol. His pulse quickened. The yellow triangle, though smeared and partially hidden, was unmistakable. Flammable. Diesel. It was not unusual for fuel to be stored near the coast, but never here. Never at the base of a condemned lighthouse, where no legal vessel would ever dock. His mind, sharpened by years of training, leapt to the implications before he could stop it. Fuel meant preparation. Fuel meant intent. He recalled patrols in his former life, nights spent intercepting vessels that ferried illicit supplies along the coast. Once, years ago, he had walked across a deck lined with barrels, the acrid scent of gasoline rising so thick it stung his eyes. That memory came back now, unbidden, and with it, the realization that what he saw on the screen could not be dismissed as carelessness. The drone rose again, drifting upward toward the lantern gallery. The image trembled slightly in the breeze, then steadied as the gimbal corrected itself. Eric's jaw tightened as new details came into view. On the corroded platform, where once the keepers had trimmed the great lamp, objects rested that did not belong to rust or neglect. Large cylinders, their surfaces dulled by salt, but too regular in shape to be stones, stood upright in a line. Cables snaked between them, some trailing back toward a darkened corner of the gallery. At the center sat a metal box, its surface dented, but along its edge a small light pulsed faintly red. For a moment, Eric could only stare, his breath shallow. This was not random storage. These were gas canisters, linked together with crude wiring, and the box could only be one thing: a timer or a trigger. He forced himself to remain steady, fighting the surge of adrenaline that threatened to shake his hands. It was a habit learned long ago, to still the body even when the mind screamed. Yet no training could soften the truth. He was looking at a setup designed not for maintenance, but for destruction. His mind worked quickly, mapping the consequences. A detonation here would shatter the fragile stone of the tower, sending debris crashing into the sea. The narrow channel below, used by fishing boats and the occasional cargo vessel, would be choked with rock. If the fuel below ignited, the ocean surface would blaze, trapping ships and crew in fire and chaos. The lighthouse, once a guardian of sailors, would become the cause of disaster. He guided the drone closer to the gallery, careful not to draw too much attention should anyone be inside. The camera picked out more details, tools scattered across the platform, a crowbar, a spool of wire, even a discarded wrench. Whoever had done this had worked quickly, carelessly even, leaving evidence behind. That carelessness, however, did not make the threat any less real. The installation looked recent, perhaps even unfinished, but it was functional enough to cause havoc. Eric swallowed hard, the taste of salt and fear thick on his tongue. He had come for beauty, to capture a relic against the dawn, and instead, he had stumbled upon a nightmare. For a moment, he wished he could convince himself otherwise, that what he saw was something innocent. Supplies left by researchers, perhaps, or forgotten maintenance equipment. But the signs would not bend to such hopes. The unmarked barrels, the scattered tools, the pulsing red light, every detail screamed of sabotage. His chest rose and fell with deliberate slowness as he forced his thoughts into order. Panic would serve nothing. He needed to act, and quickly. The drone hovered silently, recording everything, while he reached into his jacket for his phone. The screen flickered as he pressed the emergency number, the digital clock at the corner, reminding him how little time might remain before the situation escalated. As the call tone rang hollowly in his ear, Eric's gaze remained fixed on the feed. He studied the gallery once more, noting the frayed edges of the cables, the stains on the wood that looked suspiciously like leaked fuel. He imagined the men who had carried those heavy canisters up the narrow stairs, sweating, rushing, careless in their haste. He thought of how easily the setup could be triggered, by timer, by signal, by nothing more than the strike of a match if desperation took hold. The phone gave no response, only static. He lowered it with a grimace, glancing instinctively at the horizon. The cliffs around Forest Cape had always been notorious for poor reception, the rock walls and heavy fog strangling signal. But now the thought pressed against him with darker weight. Was it only the landscape that blocked him? Or had those who planted the devices ensured no call could escape? The drone shifted slightly in the wind, and he corrected its course, guiding it into another slow arc around the tower. He told himself it was only habit, but deep down he knew he was searching for more, for anything that might confirm his fears beyond doubt. His eyes caught on a small detail, then half hidden beneath the platform's railing lay a plastic case, its lid open. Inside, wire spilled out in tangled heaps as though abandoned in mid-task. A careless worker would have tidied, concealed, removed evidence. This, instead, was the sign of haste. He felt his chest tighten again. Whoever had done this might still be here. The thought slid into him with cold finality. The boat below was no relic. It was transport, waiting. The open door was no accident. The abandoned tools were not simply forgotten. He was not merely witnessing the aftermath of some secret operation. He was staring at something in progress. The realization made his skin prickle with urgency. He forced himself to remain steady, to resist the impulse to move rashly. Instead, he studied the scene once more, committing every angle, every object to memory. Then he raised his phone again, climbing the small slope beside his truck, desperate to find a line of signal strong enough to reach beyond the cliffs. The drone buzzed faintly above, its camera unblinking, capturing the silent menace of the lighthouse transformed. Eric felt the weight of choice pressing down on him. He had promised himself, long ago, that his days of responsibility had ended with his retirement, that he would never again bear the burden of decisions that carried the weight of lives. But here he was, standing on a lonely overlook, watching through the eye of a machine as the past reached out and seized him again. The sight of those barrels, of the timer's pulsing light, of the open door and the abandoned tools, none of it would leave him, He knew what it meant. He knew what had to be done. He pressed the phone to his ear once more, straining for a signal. In the background, the drone circled the tower, its small whine nearly lost in the roar of the sea. The lighthouse stood silent, yet now it seemed alive with threat. Eric's pulse beat hard against his temples as he whispered to himself words he had once lived by. Observe, assess, act. The time for beauty had ended. The time for vigilance had returned. The phone gave him nothing but static, a broken rattle of noise that seemed to mock his urgency. Eric pressed it harder against his ear, as though sheer force of will might drag a voice through the dead air. But the cliffs yielded no mercy. The silence of the line pressed into him, as heavy as the fog rolling over the sea. He lowered the device slowly, his jaw tightening, eyes still fixed on the drone's feed. On the small screen, the lighthouse loomed like a relic out of place, its rust and stone betraying age, yet its presence now charged with menace. The pulsing red light from the box atop the gallery blinked with maddening rhythm, as if it were the heartbeat of something unnatural. He shifted his stance on the overlook, feeling the wind claw at his jacket, and for the first time in years, the familiar pull of fear and duty returned in full measure. He knew the terrain too well. The cliffs around Forest Cape were notorious for strangling communication, but the strength of the static suggested more than nature's interference. A suspicion gnawed at him that some kind of signal jammer could be in play, crude but effective, designed to ensure that whatever was unfolding here remained unseen and unheard by the world beyond. He remembered exercises from long ago, when his unit practiced responding to sabotage along critical points of infrastructure. They had always warned that the first weapon of sabotage was silence, the cutting of lines, the masking of signals. Standing there with the wind howling past, Eric understood he was living that lesson once more. He guided the drone higher, rising above the lantern room until it floated in the thinning fog. The machine's camera swept across the gallery and then tilted downward, its lens capturing the battered door below. A flicker of motion jolted him upright. Two figures emerged into the daylight, their outlines sharp against the gray stone. They moved with a nervous urgency, scanning their surroundings as if expecting company. For a fleeting second, Eric hoped they were researchers or officials he had not been told about. But the thought vanished as quickly as it came. The way they moved, the quick jerks of their heads, the way their hands stayed close to their sides, it was the posture of men who expected interruption, not of workers at ease. They stepped out onto the crumbling platform that jutted from the base of the lighthouse. The taller of the two raised his hand, pointing toward the sea, while the other pulled the tarp more tightly over the barrels. It was an unmistakable act of concealment. Eric's breath caught in his chest. The sight of them confirmed everything he feared. This was not a forgotten cache. It was active, deliberate, and guarded. One of them turned his face toward the drone. Though distance blurred the details, Eric could see the tension in his body, the stiffening of shoulders, the tilt of a head that recognized the eye watching from above. The man's arm shot upward, gesturing sharply. The second figure moved fast, stepping back inside, only to return moments later with something long and dark clutched in his hands. Eric knew the shape before the feed fully revealed it. A rifle. The crack of the shot reached him a second after he saw the muzzle flare on the screen. The drone shuddered, the image jolting wildly as the wind of the bullet disturbed the air nearby. Eric's stomach dropped. He reacted instinctively, fingers twisting the controls to send the machine surging upward. The drone climbed in a steep arc, wobbling but holding steady, pulling free from their aim. Another flash burst from below, another near miss, the sound of gunfire muted by the distance, but no less real. His pulse thundered in his ears. The drone leveled out high above, well out of easy range. On the screen, The men had lowered the weapon, gesturing angrily to one another before retreating back into the tower. For a moment the scene was still again. The barrels huddled in silence beneath their tarp, the door to the lighthouse gaping like a wound. Eric drew a long, shuddering breath. They had seen him. They knew someone was watching. That knowledge changed everything. He bent low, clutching the phone again as he scrambled toward his truck. The gravel slipped beneath his boots, every step measured by urgency. If the signal could not break free here, he would have to climb higher ground. He threw the case into the passenger seat, keeping the controller in hand, and started the engine. The truck rumbled, gears grinding as he forced it onto the narrow road that wound upward along the cliffs. The drone, far above the lighthouse now, remained his sentinel, circling the tower in broad arcs. He kept one eye on the screen as the other scanned the winding road ahead. The higher he drove, the more the static thinned. He stopped at a small outcrop, heart pounding, and tried again. This time the call pushed through. He heard the clipped tone of an operator on the other end, calm but alert, and words tumbled out of him with precision, sharpened by years of discipline. He described the boat, the barrels, the open door, the strange installation at the top of the lighthouse, and the armed men who had fired on his drone. His voice did not tremble, though his hand shook as it gripped the phone. He delivered the facts, as if giving a report in the field. There was silence as the operator listened, and then the response was brief but firm. They would escalate immediately. He was instructed to keep the drone in the air, to continue observing, but not to approach. A team would be dispatched. Eric closed his eyes, letting the phone rest against his thigh as the words sank in. They had believed him. It was not paranoia, not the invention of a restless veteran with too much time on his hands. The threat was real, and it was being taken seriously. He opened his eyes again and looked at the feed. The drone drifted above the sea, watching the lighthouse in eerie stillness. The boat rocked faintly against the rocks, the tarp fluttered in the breeze, and the door to the tower remained half open. Nothing moved, yet the tension in the image felt suffocating. Stillness was never safe. Stillness was the mask danger wore before it struck. Eric steadied the drone, lowering it slightly to capture a new angle of the barrels. The camera focused on the frayed ropes, the weather-stained wood. He thought he saw the faint sheen of liquid leaking onto the stone, spreading in irregular stains. The sight tightened the knot in his chest. If those barrels ruptured, if the fuel spilled, one spark would ignite the entire structure. He thought of the fishing boats that would pass through the channel later in the day, unaware of the inferno waiting above them. He pressed his free hand against the dashboard, grounding himself. The waiting would be the hardest part. Help was on its way, but minutes stretched like hours when danger loomed in plain sight. He kept the drone circling, a lone witness in the sky, his eyes flicking between the screen and the real world beyond the windshield. The fog had thinned further, the sea glinting in the new light, deceptively peaceful. Nothing in the natural world betrayed the violence hidden within the lighthouse's walls. That contrast gnawed at him, as though reality itself had split into two layers, beauty above, menace below. The wind shifted, rattling the truck as he sat in the overlook. He adjusted the drone's course again, pushing it slightly farther out over the water. The view widened, revealing the lighthouse in full, the cliffs rising around it, the endless ocean stretching behind. From this vantage it looked small, almost harmless, yet Eric knew better. He could feel it in his bones, the same way he had felt danger during long patrols overseas, when the ordinary became sinister simply because it was out of place. The barrels, the wires, the rifle shot. They were all signs, and he had been trained to recognize them. He leaned back for a moment, exhaling slowly. The sense of solitude pressed against him. The Rangers would come, but until then, He was alone on that cliff, a man with a machine in the sky and nothing else between him and the unknown. He remembered the voice of an old superior, words that had carved themselves into memory. The first sign you ignore is the last warning you'll ever get. He had not ignored the signs. He had seen them, named them, and called them out. Now he could only wait and keep watch. Minutes dragged by, each one measured by the blinking of the red light on the gallery and the soft hum of the drone in his ears. He imagined the men inside, pacing, whispering, deciding their next move. He imagined the timer counting down in the metal box, its pulse quickening toward an end he could not see. He imagined the sea itself waiting, restless, indifferent to human lives. The tension coiled tighter with every breath. Still, he did not flinch. He kept the drone circling, eyes fixed on the feed, every detail captured. The barrels, the ropes, the stains, the silent menace of the open door. The lighthouse had once been a symbol of safety, but now it was a trap, a wound in the coastline, and he was the only one who could see it clearly. He sat in the truck, the phone still in his lap, the sea roaring beyond the cliffs, and waited for the sound of engines to break the isolation. He knew then that he had crossed a line. This was no longer just a morning spent in solitude, no longer just a man indulging in a hobby. He was part of this now, drawn into its orbit whether he wanted it or not. The threat had revealed itself, and in revealing, it had bound him to its outcome. Whatever happened next, he would not walk away untouched. The drone hovered above the tower, unblinking, while Eric Hansen sat in his truck, with the weight of vigilance pressing hard upon him, knowing the hours of peace had ended, and the moment of reckoning was drawing closer. The road below the cliffs trembled faintly as the first ranger vehicles made their way toward Forest Cape. Their engines echoed in the narrow valleys, a distant rumble that broke the silence Eric had endured for what felt like an eternity. He leaned against the wheel of his truck, his eyes fixed on the drone feed. The lighthouse stood unchanged, its silhouette stubborn against the brightening sky. The barrels beneath their tarp rested as they had before, and the door into the tower yawned open with the same quiet menace, but the stillness no longer carried only dread. Now it carried a sense of inevitability, the heavy breath before a storm that could no longer be avoided. Eric guided the drone lower, sweeping its camera across the jagged platform and then back toward the rocks where the boat lay tethered. The figures he had seen earlier had retreated inside, leaving only traces of their presence. He replayed in his mind the flare of gunfire, the crack that had reverberated even across the wind, the way the drone had jolted when bullets cut the air around it. He had been luckier than he wanted to admit. One shot placed better, and the eye in the sky would have gone dark. Without it, the truth of the barrels and the wires would still lie hidden, waiting to ignite. The vehicles grew louder now, and soon Eric could see them. Dark trucks snaking along the narrow track, headlights flashing briefly as they emerged from the cover of trees. They looked small against the sweep of the coastline, yet their presence brought a steadying calm. He was no longer alone with the weight of what he had seen. He eased the drone higher, giving a broad vantage to capture the lighthouse, the cliff, and the road below. His job had shifted. No longer just witness, he was now a guide, the one providing the eye that others would use to act. He watched as the rangers reached the base of the cliff. Doors opened, men and women in uniform stepped out, their movements brisk and purposeful. From his vantage point, they looked like fragments of order stitched into a landscape that had grown chaotic. They lifted binoculars, peered toward the lighthouse, gestured to one another in quick bursts of motion. A command vehicle rolled into position, antennae rising like spines against the sky. Radios crackled faintly in Eric's own, carrying clipped words that confirmed his role. He was told to keep the drone steady, to circle wide, and provide constant coverage of the tower. Every detail mattered now. Eric's fingers moved with precision, his eyes never leaving the screen. He traced the camera along the gallery, where the strange metal box still pulsed with its faint red light. He drifted downward, catching the barrels again, then swept toward the base of the tower, where shadows pooled thick in the doorway. The rangers on the ground moved closer, but carefully, hugging the contours of the cliffs, advancing in increments as though each step might draw fire. He admired their steadiness. The discipline of men and women trained to walk into danger reminded him of his own years in uniform. The weight of memory pressed into him, but he did not push it away. He used it, steadying his own nerves. The minutes stretched thin, filled only with the low drone of propellers in his ears and the distant murmur of the sea. The rangers worked in silence, their movements careful, deliberate. Then, from the doorway of the lighthouse, motion flickered again. A figure stepped into view, rifle in hand, posture rigid. Another followed close behind. They scanned the cliffs, unaware of just how closely they were being observed from above. The feed captured their every movement, and Eric guided the camera with slow precision. He could see their mouths moving, though the wind swallowed their words. He could see the tension in their grip, the way one lifted the weapon as though weighing whether to fire again. From his vantage point in the truck, Eric heard the radio burst to life. Voices confirmed what his eyes saw. Armed men, entrenched, guarding something they did not want discovered. Commands passed swiftly, positions adjusted. A ranger boat detached from the dock below, skimming across the water toward the platform. Eric's heart tightened as he followed its progress through the lens. He remembered the last time, the last place, where a boat had approached a structure under suspicion. He remembered the thunder that followed when an unseen charge detonated. He swallowed hard, forcing the memory back into silence. This was now. This was here. The boat slowed as it neared the base of the tower. 2 rangers crouched low within it, weapons drawn, while another stood ready with a hook and line. They reached the stone platform, secured the boat, and climbed. Eric tightened the drone's focus, following every step as boots hit the weathered surface. The armed figures at the door had already slipped back inside, shadows swallowing them whole. The rangers moved quickly, securing the barrels first. They pulled at the tarp, revealing what Eric had already known. The containers were packed tight, their surfaces scored with stains and scratches. Wires threaded out from beneath the tarp, running like veins into the tower itself. Eric's chest tightened as he zoomed in on the wires. They disappeared into the stone, vanishing through a narrow crack beside the doorframe. His gut told him what lay within. A network, a system designed to ignite at a command. His mind raced back to the image of the underwater drone circling the lighthouse hours earlier. The thought twisted through him like a blade. The barrels above, the machine below it was no accident. It was a design. Whoever had built this had meant for destruction to come from more than one place. The rangers withdrew from the barrels, their gestures sharp and urgent. More voices filled the radio, brisk commands layered over one another. A bomb squad moved forward, heavy gear weighing them down, but their pace relentless. Eric kept the drone steady, capturing it all, his fingers trembling against the controller, though his motions remained precise. He felt the weight of being the only one who had seen it from the beginning. Every image, every second of footage, was part of the record that would explain how close disaster had come. The silence of the lighthouse grew heavier with every passing minute. The men inside had not emerged again. The box on the gallery still pulsed, its red light quickening now, as though mocking the efforts of those on the ground. Eric adjusted the drone higher, circling the top once more, and froze. The pattern of the light had changed. It was no longer slow and steady, but rapid, almost frantic, a heartbeat racing toward collapse. He leaned closer to the screen, his throat dry. He remembered timers. He remembered how they flashed faster in their final moments. His voice burst into the radio, steady but urgent. He described what he saw, the shift in the rhythm, the possibility of a countdown nearing its end. The response came instantly. Orders barked. Movements sharpened. The bomb squad surged forward, their tools clutched tightly. The Rangers drew back, securing the perimeter. The tension grew until it pressed against Eric's ribs like a vice. He wanted to breathe but could not. He wanted to close his eyes but dared not. The drone hovered unblinking as the squad worked. Their gloved hands moved with calm precision, tracing the wires, cutting where needed, severing connections that could spell life or death. Eric watched them bend low beside the barrels, watched them climb toward the gallery, where the red light pulsed in its frantic rhythm. Minutes passed like hours, every second waited. Then, at last, the light stilled. It blinked once, weakly, and died. The screen showed only the gray metal box, inert now, robbed of its purpose. A wave of relief swept through him, though it was thin and brittle. The danger above had been neutralized, but the memory of the shadow below lingered. He tilted the drone down, sweeping across the water once more. The surface glittered innocently in the sun, calm and unbroken. Yet Eric knew better. Somewhere beneath that mirror still lurked the other machine, the unseen hand of a silent operator. The explosives had been meant to destroy, but the drone beneath the waves had been meant to ensure it. Its absence was not comfort. It was threat. He thought of the faceless figure who must even now be watching, somewhere hidden in the woods or cliffs, their own eyes locked to a screen as his were. 2 watchers, 2 machines, each bound to the fate of the lighthouse. The thought chilled him more than the wind ever could. This wasn't over. It was only paused. As the Rangers secured the barrels, disarmed the box, and spread across the rocks in measured formation, Eric finally lowered his drone. Its propellers whined down, the screen dimmed, and silence reclaimed the truck. He sat there with his hand still tight on the controller, staring at the gray stone tower in the distance. It stood unchanged, defiant, its beacon long extinguished. To anyone else, it might look like just another ruin on a lonely coast. But Eric Hansen knew better. It had been a trigger, a target, a symbol twisted for violence. And though it had survived the morning, the shadow beneath the water promised the story was not finished. As the sun began its slow descent, painting the sea in fractured gold, Eric leaned back in his seat, the weight of exhaustion pulling at him. He thought of the families in villages down the coast, the fishermen on their boats, the children who would sleep tonight, unaware of how narrowly their lives had been spared. That thought gave him relief, but it also pressed responsibility deeper into him. He had seen what others had not. He had spoken when silence might have been easier, and in doing so, he had pulled the valley back from the edge of catastrophe. Yet he knew it would follow him. The barrels, the wires, the red light, the shadow in the water, they would haunt his nights and linger in his waking thoughts. Somewhere, the silent operator still held his own controller, still planned, still waited. Eric's part had ended for now, but the struggle had only shifted to another place, another day. He started the truck at last, the engine rumbling into life, and steered it slowly down the winding road away from the cliffs. The lighthouse shrank in his mirror, its shape fading into fog and shadow, but in his mind, it loomed larger than ever. A monument not to guidance, but to how fragile safety could be. And as he drove into the deepening dusk, Eric understood that this day had changed him. His drone, once a tool for quiet observation, had become a weapon of vigilance. His solitude, once a shield, had turned into a burden of responsibility. He had been drawn back into a battle he thought he had left behind, One fought not with rifles, but with eyes and instincts. And though the night closed around him, though the cliffs and sea vanished into darkness, one truth remained unshakable. He had seen the threat, he had named it, and he would never again look at the silent horizon without wondering who watched it too. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss our next story. Take a moment to watch the next video waiting for you right now. There are more incredible twists ahead. And share this video with your friends and family, because some stories are too powerful to keep to yourself.